So, what happens when a leader's own inner turmoil spills out and becomes a full-blown global crisis? Today, we're diving deep into a psychological analysis of Donald Trump's leadership during a really intense moment of international pressure. The source material we're exploring asks a pretty powerful question. When a leader's private storms go public, what does that mean for the rest of us?
Right out of the gate, the material we're looking at presents this incredible split screen. On one side, you've got the world in crisis mode. We're talking an emergency session at the UN, global outrage, huge debates about international law. And on the other side, well, at the exact same time, Donald Trump's focus is on the 2020 election, settling old scores, and, windmills. The analysis we're exploring argues that this disconnect, it isn't just a side note, it is the entire story.
Okay, so to really understand that disconnect, the analysis we're digging into argues that we have to step away from traditional politics for a minute. It suggests we need to look inward, into the leader's own psychological state, because the crisis on the outside might just be a mirror of a storm happening on the inside.
And here we get to the absolute core idea of the analysis, which leans on the work of Robert Greene. The concept is actually pretty simple, but it's also chilling. It's that a leader's unexamined emotional baggage doesn't just stay private. When that person holds an incredible amount of power, those internal storms can become very, very real public catastrophes.
So the source introduces this really fascinating concept it calls a living injury. The argument is that for Donald Trump, the 2020 election isn't something that's over and done with. It's a wound that just won't close. It's like a psychic crime scene he's forced to go back to again and again. And that helps explain why, even when there's a brand new global emergency, his emotional compass seems to be stuck pointing to the past.
And that leads to another key idea: psychological compensation. The source uses this to explain a specific pattern of behavior. When a leader starts to feel like they're losing control or feeling weak, they don't retreat. Actually, they often do the opposite. They escalate, making even bigger, more dramatic moves on the world stage. The argument here is that this isn't really about strategy. It's about protecting a fragile ego from the feeling of weakness. And here is a perfect example of that compensation in action. The source points to this quote from Donald Trump's UN ambassador. Just listen to that language. It's not the usual diplomatic talk of charters and norms and agreements. It's raw, it's territorial, it's almost primal. It's the language of possession, not partnership, which the text argues is a direct symptom of that deep need to project strength at all costs.
So now the analysis pivots a little. It moves from the internal psychology to how it all actually shows up in the world, in real, tangible actions, and maybe most importantly, in the kind of language that gets used on the global stage.
According to this analysis, Donald Trump's worldview fundamentally gets force and legitimacy mixed up. Strength isn't about having moral authority or playing by the rules everyone agreed on. No, it's about the raw power to take what you want, to dominate, and to just declare your own version of reality so loudly and so forcefully that it starts to replace the real one.
This brings us to another key concept the source calls the narrative reflex. And this is a really interesting idea. Think of it like this. Most of the time, we look at the facts, and then we build a story to explain them. Well, this mechanism does the opposite. It starts with the story, a story that is emotionally essential for the leader, one where he's always the hero or the victim, and then reality itself gets bent, cut, and reshaped to fit that script.
And here's some concrete examples the source lays out. You can see the pattern so clearly. In every single case, a reality that is challenging is instantly reframed to protect that central narrative. A loss becomes theft. Criticism becomes corruption. An act of force is just law enforcement. It's a psychological defense mechanism playing out as public policy.
So, what happens when this very specific psychology, with all its narrative reflexes and territorial instincts, collides with the rest of the world? Well, the source material details the outcome, and it's pretty stark: the profound and startling isolation of the United States on the world stage.
The international pushback was fast, and it was severe. Take China. They didn't just disagree on a policy point. They framed the U.S. action as a fundamental attack on the core principles of the entire global system: sovereignty, non-interference, all of it. Then you had Russia, which came in with this chillingly sarcastic response. They took America's own favorite phrase, the rules-based order, and basically threw it right back, using it as a weapon to highlight what they saw as total hypocrisy.
Denmark's response was different. It wasn't emotional. It was legalistic and absolute. It was a sharp, clear defense of international law, basically drawing a bright red line that had just been crossed.
And finally, the UN Secretary General himself sounded the ultimate alarm. This wasn't just another political fight. This was a warning that the very foundations of the international system were starting to crack under the pressure.
Now, this is really crucial. The source argues that this isolation doesn't lead to a course correction. Instead, it kicks off this dangerous feedback loop you see here. It starts with an act of force, right? That act reduces your moral authority. With less moral authority, you have to rely even more on force. That leads to deeper isolation, which just reinforces the leader's internal story that everyone's out to get him, which then justifies the next act of force. It's a cycle that just feeds itself and gets faster and faster.
So the key takeaway here is that international condemnation doesn't work as a brake. For a leader caught in this kind of psychology, it does the exact opposite. Being cut off from anyone who will disagree with you, it just radicalizes them. They start to hear only the echo of their own voice, and their defensive story hardens into what feels like destiny.
And all of this brings us to the source's conclusion, its final, sobering warning about what it calls the ultimate danger zone, the mind of a leader with immense power who remains completely unexamined.
And this one line really sums up the entire analysis. The argument is that the biggest threat to a nation isn't an external army or some physical attack. It's the internal, unexamined emotional world of a single leader whose private storms have become everyone else's public policy.
So, after walking us through this whole path from a private grievance to a global crisis, the analysis leaves us with this final, provocative question to think about. Where does the real, ultimate threat to our world's stability actually come from? Is it in the realm of politics and policy, or is it hidden somewhere deeper, in the unexamined territory of the human mind?